images, settings, camera placement to kind of symbolize, right, visually, maybe the topic I'm like discussing and stuff. So as you can see here from this image, we sit in the middle of a road, and to our left and right are two sides of the road. And I want to use this as a symbolism for the topic today, which is Athens, Jerusalem, and the intellectual Western tradition. Now, this is heavily inspired by one of my biggest inspirations for actually this channel. He was a professor of philosophy, I believe, and his name is Dr. Michael Sugrue. Now, sadly, this man passed away a few years ago, and I never obviously met him or anything, but I did come across his content, and I encourage you guys to all go check it out. I will try to put a link to his channel in the comments, but I believe in the late 80s or 90s, he recorded this set of lectures for VHS tape, and I mean, he is an amazing orator, amazing storyteller, and he has a way of intellectually understanding the topics and explaining them very intellectually, but still in a way that is quite graspable. He doesn't, dumb down his language at all, you could say. In fact, his language is quite sophisticated. And the topics covered are quite sophisticated. And if you're at all interested in philosophy or religion, I just highly encourage you to check out his channel. But getting back to the topic here about Athens versus Jerusalem, I'm gonna briefly summarize his introductory lecture for you to help explain the point here, and that is that our society, Western society, the Western tradition, right, what we call ourselves collectively as the West, we could think of that as, the story of our civilization that starts in Jerusalem and then goes through Athens and eventually through Rome and into Europe and then America, and that is collectively why we call it the West. So the intellectual Western tradition is the sort of historical account of the major themes of philosophy and religion of those two cities. And so the way it goes is like this, is that Jerusalem gives us the Old Testament. The Old Testament gives us the story of the origins of us as, that of God, right? And along with that, the religious observance and piety towards God, right? And then Greece, Athens, gives us the story of not God, but the gods, Zeus, etc. And these are the two most prevalent or countervalent forces that have shaped and formed our society, our beliefs, and the world of the West as we know it today. And I'm going to use these two examples he gives to differentiate between what Jerusalem gives us versus what Athens gives us. I'm going to start with Jerusalem and the story of Job. And to briefly summarize, the point of the story is that Job is very dedicated to God. Job represents piety and true religious conviction and faith in God. It represents true faith in the external force outside of our physical world, and the subservience to that, the understanding and acceptance of something bigger than the world of the physical world that we can touch and feel and see and sense. And basically the story is Job is so pious, so dedicated, and everyone around him, kind of questions why he's so pious, and yet his faith remains unwavering. And then apparently God and the devil have a conversation, which leads to a bet that says that that Job is essentially propped up by God's favor, right? Because God does reward him materially on earth with family and good fortune, right? And God and the devil, says to God that basically, right, but it's God's favor that is only responsible for his success. And if God took away his favor, he bets that essentially Job would waver in his beliefs, his convictions, his faith. And so as part of that bet, God ends up sending Job a bunch of tragedies and misfortunes, and he remains pious, he remains faithful, he remains unwavering. All his friends are like, are telling him, hey, just give it up. Look at all of these Look at all this misfortune that God is bringing you, and yet you still believe in his goodness and his righteousness, and you still remain a true believer. And he does, right? And then I think the way the story ends is good, and Job is he recovers from all of the tragedies and misfortunes. All right, and so what does that tell us? Well, that gives us the intellectual understanding that there is something bigger than us, some large force, some thing external to the human experience that we can't control, but it's so fundamental to who we are. It's part of it. It's responsible for our creation. All right, so that's what the Jerusalem aspect of this duality kind of brings us. All right, and then contrast that with Athens and Greece and humanism and the ideal of striving to be better than human, to overcome our humanity, to overcome our shortcomings as humans in the context of God or the gods, right? Where humans are, weak, puny creatures on the earth, and the gods look down and laugh at us and mock us, and we're at their whim, right? And he uses the story of Prometheus in this aspect, and the story of Prometheus is that Prometheus likes humans. Prometheus I don't think he's quite a god, but he's much more powerful than a human is. But because he likes humans and he wants to give us flourishing, he wants to give us something that will help us advance, help us become better, and help us achieve the Greek ideal to transcend human limitations. And that is represented by the fire of the gods. But Zeus tells him not to. And yet he goes on to defy Zeus in the story. And so this represents the pull towards humanism. The pull towards a belief that there is no world outside of our physical world. There is nothing beyond the physical or materialistic worldview, and that essentially the goal of human existence is to essentially transcend humanity and become gods or godlike, right? To overcome our limiting traits as humans, right? And those limiting traits are things like emotions, not just physical strength or something you could say like that, right? So you have then the dichotomy set up, the juxtaposition between Athens, right, humanism, and transcending humanism to become godlike, right? And I guess the belief that the existence of anything beyond what can be physically seen, felt, or measured, right, is not necessarily doesn't exist, almost to the sense of maybe I'm not explaining it right. Let me continue the thought here, right? So we have the comparing of Athens, right, and humanism, and the transcending of humanism as sort of the overarching goal of life, versus Jerusalem and the idea of piety and a world or a plane of existence, right, beyond our physical plane, that influences very much our who we are, and our view of the world and our beliefs that are shaped by that, right? And so, on one sense, you get this battling duality, right? And there's a tension between the secular type of worldview of Athens versus the religious worldview of Jerusalem. And what that has led to in the philosophical, intellectual Western tradition is the picking of a side by most philosophers. Because once you pick a side, there are a bunch of inferences and things that sort of naturally follow from that, right? For example, if you're going to follow a materialist worldview and essentially you concede that there is no God, there is no religion, well, where does that leave you? It leaves you short of answers that physics alone, science alone, observation alone cannot answer, right? And that's what we call metaphysics, right? Metaphysical questions, right? And so to have a metaphysics or not is essentially like the core of this duality. But what Dr. Michael Sugrue concludes, and what I think is the deepest philosophical insight, is that we must be aware of these two dualities. We straddle these two dualities, and choosing one or the other leaves us devoid of answers to questions only fit for one or the other. So we might be able to gain insights from things like psychological research, behavioral research that can measure things like oxytocin release, cortisol release, right? And yet that might still leave us short of answers that go beyond the physical explanation, right? So it's not sufficient to understand that our body releases cortisol when we're under stress, right? And then this is where the Socratic method perhaps comes in, and we say, well, why do we have stress, right? Because cortisol release is the biochemical reaction to stress, but why do we experience the emotion of stress? I'm just picking this as an example. So Athens and Jerusalem, right? And the straddling of secular humanism versus religious belief, right? Choosing one or the other is going to leave you devoid of answers from which only the other can answer. So that's today's topic and lesson and discussion. Let me know your comments. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks.